Yeah, I know. Where do the great writers get those great ideas? I mean, what makes a great writer are those great ideas. But where did they get them? They stole them. Really. Great writers do not sit at their desks and come up with good ideas. They take them from where they can get them. A friend's story from history, a tale their grandmother told. Then they improve them. They add a few extra characters. They change the settings. But what they did not do was forget a great story just because it wasn't their original idea. Because life is not easy, everyone has a story to tell. You, the writer, cannot be in all places all the time, so you idea travel, so to speak. You listen to other people's experiences and tales. You remember the anecdotes. You change the names, of course, to protect the guilty. Look at it this way. As a writer, everybody else's experiences are your seeds. When you hear a good story, remember it. Write it down. Fertilize it with new faces, odd facts. What counts is the original idea, the one you did not come up with. But now it's yours. Great writers know how to explode out of the box and onto the bestseller list. They steal good ideas, trim them, adjust them, add new features, and then that idea is theirs. You can do the same thing. A little literary stealing never hurt anyone. After all, Shakespeare never went to Denmark, but Hamlet is still being read today. How you doing, writers? Welcome to the Three Amigos, out of the box and onto the bestseller list. I'm Steve Levi, the master of the impossible crime, and we are here to let you know how lucky you are, because for the last 500 years, books have been printed by publishers who only printed books that they thought would make them money. And that changed about 20 years ago with the internet, because now what happens is anybody can write a book and anybody can get it onto the internet. But there's one catch. It has to be good and it has to be original. And if you want to make any money as a writer, if you want to really make your mark in the world, you have to be original. And that is what these seminars are for, is to help you be original. And I am the master of the impossible crime. An impossible crime is a mystery where the detective has to figure out how the crime was committed. Unlike some other people you'll be hearing today, I don't kill people. And what happens is I come up with situations where the detective has to solve the crime. For instance, in the matter of the vanishing Greyhound, bank robbers in San Francisco are in a Greyhound bus with hostages and $10 million. The police are following them. They drive out onto the Golden Gate Bridge and the Greyhound bus vanishes. And now the detective has to figure out how you can make a Greyhound bus being followed by the police disappear off the Golden Gate Bridge. If you want to know, you've got to read the book. Okay? And so that is how it makes me different. And now I'm going to introduce you to Valerie, who's going to tell you why she is different. Valerie, you're up.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Valerie Winans, and I'm a reader for writers of, I'm a writer for readers of all ages. You see, I messed it up already. And so my books can be read by grandmothers or 10-year-olds, however the age is that they begin to read on their own. And so I'm going to, instead of stumbling along some more, I'm going to introduce you to Marianne Pohl.
Yay! Hi, I'm Marianne Pohl. I'm America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, and I am a charter member of this wonderful group of most of these people of author masterminds. We have, am I supposed to give an idea? Here's an idea.
And I will start the idea for you.
Oh, okay, got it. So I'm introducing myself, but first I'd also like to introduce Jeremy Richard, who I just really like, who is joining us as a guest today. And I'm hoping he can tell us who he is real quickly, and he might have some ideas for us to steal, by the way, at least for me, guys. Yeah.
How y'all guys doing?
Hi, Jeremy.
Jeremy Richard, I go by GLR or Jerry if I get in trouble. But just like Mary, like I came into being a Christian thriller writer about 3 years ago, roughly 4 years ago when I went to seminary. I just kind of got this challenge one day where somebody said Christians can't be scary, or Christians don't. Every ending is the same thing where they hug Jesus and they disappear to heaven. Just stuff like that where it's like, haven't you read the Bible? like seriously, you just think Skittles fall down from the sky. But anyway, it was a challenge. So I took on that challenge, and I really wanted to bring the Christian community into a dominance one day, to where people can see like we can write just as good as anybody else. But I wanted to extend that goal to the point to where people all around the world can relate. They don't have to be Christian. They can all agree that there is a battle between good and evil every day. So, I just wanted to come up with very catchy thrillers that people would never really think about. And I might ending up like Anne Rice, where the Catholic community might try to shut me down or something like that. I don't know. But,
we need to hook up Jeremy with James. Jeremy.
I know it. Oh yeah. Well, I think we need to. Don't you think, Steve? We should just introduce. There's lots of people here today.
Let's introduce James and
let's introduce James, and then we'll leave the big introduction for last, which would be Mr. Swinson. Go ahead. Hey, James.
James, tell us who you are, buddy.
He's in South Africa. We're just going to say the connections are good sometimes not.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give you some stories and
Thanks,
some
Mary.
ideas.
Thanks, Mary. What were you saying
There he
again?
is. Hey, James, there you are. Introduce yourself.
You are right. I'm in South Africa, and sometimes connections can be, the waves can be sometimes taking a break, or maybe in quarantine during this COVID time. Thank you very much for your acknowledgement, and hi everybody. So this is James Kaipe. Even Swinson likes that part of my name, Kaipe.
You got to do it again.
He's
Do
the
it
only
again.
one who can pronounce it.
Yeah, you're the only one who can pronounce it.
quick. James,
Do it again.
quick.
Only
No.
even. Kaipe.
James, do it again.
Kaipe. James Kaipe.
Yeah.
Ah. Okay, my turn. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little story about how I stole somebody else's idea and used it in my story. And portions of it are true, of course. And if you really want to see how I manipulated it, feel free to go ahead on Readers and Writers and see The Alligator in the Orchard. That's the finished product. And the first part of the story is when I was graduated from high school on my way to college in that last summer. And we just gotten my driver's license, and I'm driving around town with my buddies, and we kept getting pulled over by the same cop all the time. And, it was just harassment because, he pulled me over and he said my license plate needed to be cleaned up. And sometimes he pulled over and he said he wanted to check my brakes. And he was doing it to everybody. And all of the graduates were saying, I really should do something to this guy, because he's just a pain in the neck. And he always stayed in the same spot in Riverside. This is Riverside, California. He kind of hid out among this orchards and the orange orchards out there. Everybody knew where he was, and so we just kind of avoided him. And nothing really happened about that. But I was always thinking, what could we have done? Because you're thinking about that. Okay, now I'm going to take you on a segue, and then I'm going to come back to it. One of my first jobs was back east. I went back east and I was working in a museum, and I was the historian. I was kind of the historical assistant there. And I was talking to some of the people there, and 2 years earlier, the museum had a weight problem. And the weight, you have to understand that a museum, 10% of what you call 10% of what the museum owns is out on the floor where you can see it. 90% of it is in a warehouse. So what happens is when you see a stuffed elephant that they're there, they actually have 2 or 3 other stuffed elephants in the warehouse. So what happens is that if you keep getting material, and this museum is like 200 years old, it just gets more and more stuff, and all of the stuff is heavy, and it's on 4 floors. And so what happens is you begin to have a weight problem. So what they did is they said, okay, fine, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of a lot of stuff, and we're going to go ahead and dump it. And every high school, college student in the era was thrilled because they threw out giraffes, they threw out alligators, I mean, it was kind of like a rummage sale, but everything was free. They said they had lines of people. They'd bring stuff out and they'd throw it out into the back of the museum, and it would just disappear. And he said one particular guy ended up with this 6-foot alligator. And I said, what did he do with it? And he said, well, it was really great. Is because what they did is they went ahead and used it as a couch in this guy's dorm room. And it got passed around. Guy graduated and somebody else. And he said over the years, it just got so ratty that nobody could do anything to do with it. And it finally really got dumped out. And I was thinking about that, and I was saying, you know, I could use that idea. And so what I did is I went ahead and I took the alligator, this rat alligator, and we all knew where that cop, now back to the cop, we always knew where the cop was sitting. So what we did is we very quietly, this in my story, we very quietly slipped this alligator into kind of some of the underbrush back where we knew where he was going to be located. And we would drive by and take a look. And when we saw him there, then we'd drive out to a pay telephone, because back in those days, they didn't have cell phones. And we called up the newspaper and we said, hey, you know, there's this loose alligator out there, you know, in the orchard, you know, out in Victoria. Well, the minute that we called the newspaper called the cops and said, do you guys know anything about an alligator that's loose out there? You know, and of course, you know, what happens is, since it's right near the cop goes out looking for it. And what we did is I did some other stuff to make it, to surprise the cop. We put a little rope on it to pull it so it had some motion, and the cop pulled out his gun and fired on it. You know, and so it is a great story because I flat out stole that, because the alligator that we used came from back east, but everybody was talking about how they would use it back east. So when you get a good idea, don't throw it away, even though you can't use it right then, because someday every idea, good, bad, or otherwise, you'll be able to use. Okay, Valerie, it's your turn.
Well, first of all, Steve, I didn't think we were talking about autobiographies today. Second of all, I wanted James to meet Jeremy because James is also in seminary, or was in seminary as far as I know. Seems like those two guys have got a lot in common, both Christian. Well, James doesn't write thrillers, but anyway, good to see both of you here. Welcome, welcome.
Yeah.
So, I know this person that wrote, that decided to write a book about hero dogs. And so she researched, she read every book she could get her hands on that involved a hero dog. And so when she decided which handful of hero dogs she was going to write about, she had her stories already written. So not to plagiarize, but to take the story and present it in a new way, this person wrote the story in the voice of a dog, about dogs, from the viewpoint of a dog, in the voice of a dog. So that's the story of my stealing ideas, stories that were already written, and just told them in a new way and recreated them into a new story. And, you know, we have Marianne Pohl, but we also have a guest speaker tonight, Victoria Hardesty. So maybe Marianne, when you finish, would you like to introduce Victoria to us?
Definitely, and also introduce Evan, because I think we missed introducing those two people. But anyway, I have, you know, I thought and went, I haven't ever stolen an idea. You know what I mean? So then I thought a little more honestly, and I realized that, in fact, two of my short stories that I've written were both stolen ideas. One of them was the Norbert Crosskill and the Dodge Charger. That one, literally, I had a neighbor who was kind of legally blind. And he kind of drove sometimes, even when he wasn't supposed to. But yeah, I know. But and that was in Anchorage, of course. People are crazy there. So anyway, but I had heard a story before him about a woman whose grandmother was legally blind in a small town and would actually get in the car to drive, and her friend would navigate. So because the grandmother had the driver's license, but the friend did not. So they literally would do this. So I decided, that was too funny a story and a character to me. So I literally ended up putting them both together and ended up with this happening in Ravens Cove with Norbert. And it actually came out kind of cute because that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. So that's one of the stories that I have stolen. And I'm thrilled because I took it just like anyone does, and I created my own story out of it, but I had gotten the idea from 2 other people. And now I'm going to actually ask Evan to introduce himself and say hello. And then I'm going to ask Victoria to share because she has ideas too that she has absconded with, as it were.
Okay, I'm Evan Swinson, and I'm here as a learner. I'm not a writer. I'm here to learn from writers. I have a friend, however, who's on the police force, and so I'm working undercover. So I'm watching some of these thefts, and I will report them. So be careful what you say, Victoria.
You're really funny. You're so funny, Evan. Evan is also a publisher, just everybody know, and he's a writer, even though he says he's not.
We know he got the face.
He's got the face. Yeah, he does.
He can't hide it.
Yeah, I know.
It's the writer's smirk. It's the writer's smirk.
The writer's smirk. So Victoria Hardesty, let's hear from you, one of our good friends too.
Well, I write horse stories. So I put out little pleas periodically for, tell me your stories. And I've had probably 15 of them that have turned into short articles. But I heard this story about a young boy that came here as an immigrant with his parents. And his parents died not long after they got here. So his grandfather took him out and got him a horse. And I sat down and did some research on it. I thought it'd be a lot more interesting story if he came from someplace where when he got here, he didn't speak the language. So I decided to bring him in from Brazil, not Mexico. And so you have a whole language barrier problem to compound all the other issues this kid had. And I just finished the book. When I put it with my beta readers, I had one of them call me and said, do you know who the president of Brazil really is? And I said, no. And she said, don't stick my name in the acknowledgments of your story if you're going to put it that way. Apparently my research and the writing spelled out the reason for the family leaving. And it was, political stuff like Venezuela. But she was terrified because she looked it up and it really was true. So it's kind of interesting how you can kind of sidetrack from something that you hear and come up with something else that is real enough to scare somebody off. And I've taken several stories. The 6th book in our series was about a real horse. And I knew the horse, I met the horse, and I know the horse now. And what a charmer he is. The 5th book, I also drove 2.5 hours to meet him. And he's now got a new home and a new mom, and he's doing very well. So it's been kind of fun to do. And you get the story and tell part of it, or you get the story and tell the end of it. And you hear these stories all over the place. Just pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want you to
good.
know there was, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Someone was going to join us, but I think she's on the road and thought for some reason it was at 6:20 Pacific time. So I'm not sure. Her name is Cheryl Smith. I'm not sure she'll be joining us here today, but she is chatting. And I had a chat over here, a message for you, Steve, that says really interesting story from Rebecca Wetzler. She really liked it.
Okay. Well, my turn again. I know that a couple of things here. First of all, a lot of people are saying, well, gee, that's really good, you know, but where do I get these stories? And so I've got 3 leads, immediate leads for you. Okay, before I got on here, I went to eBay and I punched up anecdotes. How many books of anecdotes they have for sale on eBay? They have 7,759 books of anecdotes. So if you want to go out and spend a little bit of money and buy anecdote books, that's great. I went to Amazon. Amazon has 10,000 of them. So anytime you're looking for a good story and you don't know where to go, get yourself a book of anecdotes. If you don't want to spend any money, just jump on Google. According to Google, they've got 37,500,000 anecdotes. So what happens is so don't ever come back and say that you can't steal an idea from somebody, because there's 37,500,000 anecdotes that are available on Google. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to give you 2 strong leads.
Hey,
Now,
Steve,
one that I have. Go
I
ahead.
want to ask you a question, Steve, before you go on. What do you mean by an anecdote? Give me an example of how I could use that.
Well, an anecdote would be something where it's a little story of somebody that's something that happened that's interesting. I remember that one particular anecdote that I've never used, but I thought was very clever, was this is in England, and this is a true story, and it's was Whistler. For those of you who don't know who Whistler is, he was a famous American painter who lived in England. And if you still don't know who he is, punch up Whistler's mother, and you'll be able to see him. He was very high priced painter. And let's see, one day he thought he was better than anybody else. And one day his dog, he knew the royal family, and one day his dog was sick, so he called the royal surgeon. And the royal surgeon, of course, figured that, he was going to go to Whistler's house and he was going to take care of Whistler or Whistler's wife. And the surgeon gets to Whistler's house, and Whistler points to the sick dog on the floor and says, "Take care of my dog." This is the royal surgeon. So the royal surgeon said, okay, fine. It's Whistler, what are you going to do? And so the surgeon took care of the dog and left. And a couple of weeks later, the royal surgeon calls up Whistler and says, I'd like you to come over and talk to me about painting. And so Whistler figures, this is great. I'm going to get myself a contract. So Whistler showed up, and the royal surgeon pointed at his door and said, "Paint my door." So that's just a little quip. I mean, that would never make a history book. It might make a footnote someplace if you want to be funny, but it's just a little tidbit. Now, maybe you could turn that into a story, make you use that in a novel, change the names, to protect the guilty. But that's what an anecdote is. If you are interested in American and humorous, what you want to do is, and you'll probably have to write this down, take a look up ballyhoo. It's Ballyhoo. And the ballyhoo era in American history is from about 1900 to about 1925. And these are the people who would go out and they would go ahead, and this is before advertising became big. These guys would figure out ways to go ahead and sucker the papers into advertising something. And he got hired by this one, Reichenbach, and he wrote the reason I'm telling you is the reason I can't use anything, because he already wrote his autobiography and had all these tricks in it. And what he did is he was told to go ahead and advertise Tarzan, the movie Tarzan. At that time, people were going to movies, but they were just going to the movies. They weren't going to one movie in particular. Back in those days, if you wanted to go to an MGM movie, you went to the MGM theater. And if you wanted to see the, United Artists, you went to the United Artists Theater. So you had to attract people out of other theaters. And they just finished doing the first Tarzan. We're talking about 1925. And they hired him to go ahead and advertise the movie Tarzan. Don't forget, there's no radio, there's no television the way we know it. So what he's got to do is he's got to come up with a unique way to go ahead and advertise Tarzan. And this is the guy to do it. So what he did, he went to this hotel and he got himself a big room. And the room opened up onto an alley. And so what he did is he went out, he rented the room for a week. Okay, and then he went to the room and he took out the window and they got a crane and they took this tiger, this lion, and they put the lion up in the room. Okay, and after they got the lion in the room, they called the press and said, "Hey, watch this." And they called down to room service and said they wanted 350 pounds of raw meat. And the restaurant says, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Yeah, we got a lion up here." And so here's this picture, which you can find in his book and the newspaper. Where they've got this lion in the book and the guy downstairs is registered in as Tarzan. And it made all of the papers. And there's a whole book of what he would do. And this is the whole era from 1900 to 1925. It's called the Ballyhoo area. There's all kinds of little things that he did in there. And like I'm saying, I don't use them is because I'm looking for something that has never been done before. And I did all kinds of research on the 1920s and everything that I thought was so great, somebody had written about it already. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to leave you with an idea that we came up with a long time ago. I haven't used it. I don't know that I'll ever use it, but it's still not a bad one, but it's just not a kind of an idea that I would use. And that is that we all know that certain animals go extinct. And the reason they go extinct is because they taste so good. And that's why they're extinct. So I was thinking of coming up with a cookbook of, like dodo cookbook. Here we went back in history and we found this recipe for dodos, and that's why dodos are extinct. And it'd be very good if you could get yourself a list of extinct animals, like passenger pigeons and dodos, and you can go ahead and make yourself a cookbook or tie that into short stories or a novel somehow. But that's an idea I've never used. Steal it from me. Hey, Valerie, it's up to you.
Boy, Steve, you are really a hard act to follow, I gotta tell you.
I agree.
In talking about stealing ideas, there was a writer, and some of you may remember him and some of you maybe do not. His name was Studs Terkel. Studs Terkel was a journalist out of Chicago, and his shtick was to interview people and then write this book based on these interviews that he did. He wrote a book called Working, and he went all over the United States and he just interviewed people, and he took their story and wrote their story and then put all of these stories together in an anthology and called it Working. And it was like a bestseller. He did that with various topics, just traveling the world and interviewing people. Now, doesn't that sound like fun?
Yeah.
It really does. Okay, I'm going to ask Jeremy, do you have ideas that you have stolen? And then I want James to tell us.
Oh, ideas I've stolen. I don't know. I can't really say I stole, but I guess there was a scene that I saw in the Nun, like the movie of the Nun, where I was like, oh, that could have been explained a lot better. Where I'm thinking it was the part of the reason about the generational Passover of this evil entity. So I kind of had this trigger where I wanted to understand more about generational curses and seeing, because like in the movie, it was like these people were being affected down the line or whatever. So it was some kind of undertone. So I would say that I took that and I flipped it, and I wanted to create that a little bit more to where people who are not Christian to really understand what that meant. Kind of like, when there's a person who plays sports and their kids are sport players and people are like, how did that happen? And you always hear that you're just like your father, or you got the same genes as your mom and dad. The same thing can happen spiritually when something's corrupt. Like if you were a criminal or a serial killer, there's a good possibility that you can pass that gene over It may not be to the first son or daughter, but it can be their son or daughter or that other generation. It's like you don't really know. That's the hidden scary part about it. So I kind of got interested in that and started understanding more about it. So then I found ways to create stories through that. So I guess I stole that way.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is why your stories are scarier than my stories.
Like, yeah, it really did make sense to me, where I was like, oh wow, this is exactly about the reason why they say pray over your family, because things like that can happen. And I guess I would say I was a victim of that, because my dad's side, they were like street guys, and it came on me when I was young. So I started craving it by the time I was 7 years old. So I start being a Dennis the Menace by nature. It was like natural. The teachers are already setting up meetings and stuff to keep me like one. They, you know, those little talk shows they had the troubled kids. They wanted me to go to one of those. It's like it was that bad. Like I was that student. I was smart. I did my tests, and then it just blew their mind. They're like, I don't understand why you're in trouble and why you're so bad. But then you love going to school and doing your work, but you can't because you keep getting in trouble. And ISS is like your home. So so that part I was like, I don't get it. So once I kind of understood this generational thing, I was like, oh my God, like I was a victim of this. So that's like this stuff. What if you go deeper? So, and the spookier level, whatever. So I just start diving in, start stealing more ideas and learning from other writers, and listening to Catholic priests who actually kind of backed me up on these kind of comments about that stuff. So
wow,
it was interesting.
That is interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, James. I can't say your last name.
It's fine, Mary.
We did try, and I always make a fool of myself when I do that. Do you still
Jeremy, it's actually 002.
002?
Oh,
What?
yes. 007 is James Bond. And 007 only meant a gun. And you can even look at the shape of it. So when I came, or when I was born, I said 002, which meant peace. You know what I mean? But anyway, I wouldn't say this is a stealing or something, but I mean, as Steve Levi would say, we don't steal as authors, we borrow from other people's ideas and then we modify those ideas.
That's right.
We never steal from others, we just borrow and then we modify. And after us, there will be people who come and borrow from us, even if we are dead or something. So we give this knowledge to other generations. But I want to share this with you. When I was still an actor, as a little boy, there were two old women just coming out of the theater, and we were just walking behind them. And we were worried because we didn't have a taxi fare. We didn't know how we would get home, and it was raining. It was a very bad day. And these two women only worried about one thing. And one said to the other, "My dear darling Josephine, it is so difficult to find a good garden boy these days." And then we laughed at this idea. And we were so shocked by this because they were worried about good garden boys and we were worried about tax money. How are we getting home? So I wrote an article about this, stealing the idea of how to find a good garden boy these days. So at Mary, instead of stealing it or plagiarizing it's just an idea I borrowed from those two women.
Good for you, James. That's a wonderful story. Well, it's not a wonderful story. Those women were kind of egotized about themselves, weren't they?
Well, I wouldn't say that, Valerie, but it was a good story, though. I mean, it was their particular experience at the time. So, I mean, I wouldn't know what type of a good garden boy they wanted or they had experienced before until that day or that very moment. So it was a good story. we need such people. I mean, as writers, we need such stories. We need to listen to people where they converse. I mean, I sometimes go to a public transport, whether a taxi, a bus, a plane, and I listen to people, and that's how we create stories, especially theater stories, the conversation between people, ideas that people give to us, even if they are contradicting to what we perceive or what we think about whatever. But we need, in order for us to grow, I believe, in order for us to grow, we need to listen to those people, whether we agree or not. That's how we
Amen.
build a story. That's how we build a book.
That's true. That is so true. We just talked about that at our meeting earlier today, and that is I couldn't agree with you more, James.
Sometimes the best dialogue is something you've heard before, and we all have to write
True.
dialogue. But I think I have a cat emergency. I will be right back. I don't know if you could hear him, but he's pretty loud. He's an old man and he's hungry.
Well, I don't know. Are we done or do we want to go on or?
I want to share something with us for Steve Levi, please.
Hey,
He likes these anecdotes, and I had one that I learned from someone else. I'll pass it on, and maybe Heinz Noonan could use this sometime. One of our authors, whose name will remain anonymous for this story, has a beautiful wife and an outstanding, beautiful movie star daughter. And so they were at a book signing, not their signing, but someone else's they were supporting. And his daughter was standing there, and I turned to him and I said, your daughter really has your looks. And he said, no, she has her mother's looks. And I said, no, her mother still has hers. Now, that sounds like a Heinz Noonan story.
Yeah, that sounds like a great little quip there.
Yeah, at the end of your story, that's kind of one of those.
I'm gonna write that down and see if I can twist it into one of my stories.
Okay. No, I sell those, Steve. So if you steal that, well, then I have to come after you. But if you borrow it, it's okay.
I will borrow it.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, I'll just do the old wrap up. If you're a writer or a reader, this is your moment. This is the golden age of literature is here. Because as I said in the beginning, publishers, the big publishers, publish books that they think will sell. They don't know whether they're good books. They just know that they want to sell them. Okay, what happens is now that means that anybody out there can go ahead and write a book and you can get it into the system. But to be successful, you have to be different. You have to be unique. You have to have something that's different. If you do not have something that's unique, the competition is horrendous. So to be successful, you have to be original. And hopefully these presentations that we're giving with the three amigos, the out of the box and onto the bestseller list, we're trying to give you original concepts, original ideas, original routes to travel so that you can be a best-selling writer. And after you are, you can send us cash because we help you along. And I want to thank everybody, and we will see you in a month. Next will be third Tuesday of every month at 2 o'clock Alaska time, and who knows what time that is anywhere else, but we will be there the third Tuesday. And thank everybody for being here, and we will see you in a month.